I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am, laying out the mess of my family and business history to strangers on the internet because I can't decide if I'm the villain or just someone who finally took control of their own life. To understand where I'm coming from, you need to know this. I practically grew up inside my parents' company. It wasn't just a business. It was the third child in our family, one they seemed to love more than either me or my brother. From the time I was old enough to type invoices, file receipts, and answer phones, I was in that office. Summers weren't for vacations. They were for shadowing managers, learning processes, and paying my dues. By the time I was in my 20s, I wasn't just some kid helping out. I was running entire departments. My parents would tell people proudly at networking events, "Oh, our son is the backbone of the operation." And I believed them. I thought all that sweat and sacrifice meant something. I skipped parties, turned down trips, and worked overtime for no extra pay. All because I believed I was building a future, our future. And then one day, out of the blue, my parents called me into their office. I thought it was going to be about a promotion, or maybe even partial ownership. Instead, they sat me down, avoided eye contact, and said, "We're sorry, but we can't afford to keep you on. Times are tough. We have to make cuts." Just like that, I was out, fired. After years of loyalty, blood, and sweat, I was told to pack up my desk. Now here's where it gets worse. My brother, let's call him Ryan, kept his cushy spot. Ryan, the guy who came in late, left early, and spent more time on his phone than actually working. Ryan, who had a reputation around the office for screwing up projects and pawning them off on me to fix. He wasn't just kept. He was promoted shortly after I left. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I begged my parents to reconsider, to look at the numbers, the contributions, the literal fact that I had been saving their company money by streamlining processes. They shook their heads and said it was nothing personal. Nothing personal. I walked out of that building humiliated, angry, and honestly broken. Everything I had given up for them suddenly felt like a joke. It wasn't about cost-cutting. It was about favoritism. Ryan was the golden child. I was expendable. That moment changed everything for me. I wish I could say I immediately bounced back, but the truth is I spiraled. I doubted myself. I questioned if maybe I wasn't as valuable as I thought. For a while, I drifted, odd jobs, freelance gigs, anything to pay the bills while I licked my wounds. My parents never once checked in on me, never asked how I was doing after throwing me out. But over time, something inside me hardened. I realized I could either let their betrayal define me, or I could define myself. So I started small. A side hustle turned into a business idea. That idea turned into a startup. I poured everything I had into it. Every late night, every lesson I had learned from being chewed up and spat out by my parents' so-called family company. And wouldn't you know it? My little startup grew. Slowly at first, then faster than I could have imagined. Investors noticed. Clients came on board. Within a few years, I was no longer the kid who got fired. I was the CEO of a competitor. And here's where things get messy. Because years later, the tables turned, and suddenly, I was the one holding the cards. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am, laying out the mess of my family and business history to strangers on the internet, because I can't decide if I'm the villain or just someone who finally took control of their own life. To understand where I'm coming from, you need to know this. I practically grew up inside my parents' company. It wasn't just a business. It was the third child in our family, one they seemed to love more than either me or my brother. From the time I was old enough to type invoices, file receipts, and answer phones, I was in that office. Summers weren't for vacations. They were for shadowing managers, learning processes, and paying my dues. By the time I was in my 20s, I wasn't just some kid helping out. I was running entire departments. My parents would tell people proudly at networking events, "Oh, our son is the backbone of the operation." And I believed them. I thought all that sweat and sacrifice meant something. I skipped parties, turned down trips, and worked overtime for no extra pay. All because I believed I was building a future, our future. And then one day, out of the blue, my parents called me into their office. I thought it was going to be about a promotion, or maybe even partial ownership. Instead, they sat me down, avoided eye contact, and said, "We're sorry, but we can't afford to keep you on. Times are tough. We have to make cuts." Just like that, I was out, fired. After years of loyalty, blood, and sweat, I was told to pack up my desk. Now here's where it gets worse. My brother, let's call him Ryan, kept his cushy spot. Ryan, the guy who came in late, left early, and spent more time on his phone than actually working. Ryan, who had a reputation around the office for screwing up projects and pawning them off on me to fix. He wasn't just kept. He was promoted shortly after I left. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I begged my parents to reconsider, to look at the numbers, the contributions, the literal fact that I had been saving their company money by streamlining processes. They shook their heads and said it was nothing personal. Nothing personal. I walked out of that building humiliated, angry, and honestly broken. Everything I had given up for them suddenly felt like a joke. It wasn't about cost-cutting. It was about favoritism. Ryan was the golden child. I was expendable. That moment changed everything for me. I wish I could say I immediately bounced back, but the truth is I spiraled. I doubted myself. I questioned if maybe I wasn't as valuable as I thought. For a while, I drifted odd jobs, freelance gigs, anything to pay the bills while I licked my wounds. My parents never once checked in on me, never asked how I was doing after throwing me out. But over time, something inside me hardened. I realized I could either let their betrayal define me, or I could define myself. So I started small. A side hustle turned into a business idea. That idea turned into a startup. I poured everything I had into it. Every late night, every lesson I had learned from being chewed up and spat out by my parents' so-called family company. And wouldn't you know it? My little startup grew. Slowly at first, then faster than I could have imagined. Investors noticed. Clients came on board. Within a few years, I was no longer the kid who got fired. I was the CEO of a competitor. And here's where things get messy. Because years later, the tables turned, and suddenly, I was the one holding the cards. When I walked out of my parents' office for the last time, I promised myself one thing. I would never again put my future in someone else's hands. That vow became my fuel. At first, I didn't know what I was building toward, but I knew I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life proving myself to people who had already decided I was disposable. I started small. Freelancing, consulting, helping struggling businesses with operations, bookkeeping, and systems management, the stuff I'd been forced to master while my brother snoozed at his desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those unpaid hours in my parents' office turned into my personal arsenal. I knew how to cut costs, how to streamline processes, how to find hidden leaks in a budget. People were willing to pay for that knowledge. At first, it was just enough to get by, rent, groceries, the basics. But then something happened. One of my clients, a mid-sized logistics company, saw their profits spike after implementing my strategies. They recommended me to 2 other companies. Word spread. Soon I wasn't just freelancing. I was running a consulting operation out of my 1-bedroom apartment, working 16-hour days but finally seeing the results reflected in my own bank account instead of someone else's. The tipping point came when an angel investor approached me after a speaking event. I had been invited to talk about small business efficiency, a gig I almost turned down because I didn't think I was big enough yet. But apparently I made an impression. This investor told me flat out, "You have the mind of a CEO. You shouldn't be patching holes in other people's ships. You should be building your own fleet." Those words stuck with me. With their backing, I launched my own company. At first, it was just 5 of us crammed into a tiny shared office space with peeling paint and flickering lights. But we had energy, ideas, and grit. We weren't weighed down by family politics or nepotism. We were lean, scrappy, and hungry. Clients liked that. They trusted us because we delivered, and because we didn't pretend to be anything we weren't. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but keep tabs on my parents' company. Call it morbid curiosity. They had always acted like their business was untouchable, a cornerstone of the community. But once I was out, the cracks began to show. They lost 2 of their biggest clients within a year. Rumors spread about late deliveries, botched contracts, and employee turnover. A few former coworkers reached out to me privately and confessed the atmosphere had become toxic. Ryan, it turned out, wasn't exactly stepping up to the plate. In fact, he was running the place into the ground with his leadership. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part of me still wanted to call my parents and say, "See? This is what happens when you choose favoritism over competence." But I didn't. I kept my head down and focused on growing my own business. Fast forward a few years, and the gap between us had become a canyon. Their company was struggling to stay relevant, while mine was gaining recognition in industry magazines. I was invited to conferences, awarded innovation grants, and even asked to mentor other young entrepreneurs. And then came the moment that changed everything. We were approached by an acquisition firm. They were interested in expanding into our sector, and they wanted me to lead the division. It was more than just a job offer, it was an empire-building opportunity. I said yes. Overnight, my small scrappy company became the beating heart of a much larger competitor. One that, coincidentally, was circling like a shark around my parents' failing business. For the first time in my life, I had the power they once held over me. And when I realized what was coming, I had to ask myself, would I be the bigger person and extend a hand to save them? Or would I let them reap what they had sown? By the time I was 30, my life looked nothing like the wreckage I had walked away from a few years earlier. I had a team, a respected name in the industry, and for the first time in my life, actual control over my destiny. But with success comes power, and with power, temptation. I first heard whispers about my parents' company being in trouble from a former coworker. "They're bleeding clients," he told me. "Ryan has no clue what he's doing. People are quitting left and right." At first, I brushed it off. I didn't want to get sucked into that drama again. But the reports kept piling up. Missed deadlines, lawsuits, vendors pulling out. They had gone from being the family cornerstone of the community to just another sinking ship. And then one day, sitting in a meeting with the executives of the acquisition firm I joined, my heart stopped. On the projector screen was the logo of my parents' company. The VP explained they were looking to expand aggressively. "This one's been mismanaged to hell," he said bluntly, clicking through slides of financials that confirmed every rumor I'd heard. "It's undervalued, ripe for takeover. With the right leadership, it could be turned around in 18 months. Everyone in that room turned to me. They all knew the history, they knew the name, and they knew I was in the perfect position to make the call. "Do you want it?" the VP asked. I can't even explain what that moment felt like. Years of anger, betrayal, and humiliation came flooding back. I pictured myself sitting in my parents' office, being told I wasn't worth keeping on payroll while my brother kept his seat. I remembered every sleepless night wondering if I'd wasted my life. And now, here I was, being handed the keys to the kingdom, their kingdom. At first, I didn't say anything. I told them I needed time to review the numbers. But the truth was, I needed time to wrestle with myself. That night, my phone rang. It was my mother. We hadn't spoken in months, not really. Polite holiday texts, maybe, but nothing of substance. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice cracked on the line. "We need your help." I swear I thought I misheard her. This was the same woman who had looked me in the eye and said, "It's nothing personal," as she signed my termination papers. And now she was calling me like a drowning sailor clutching for a lifeline. She explained the company was weeks away from defaulting on a major loan. Vendors were threatening lawsuits. Clients were leaving faster than they could beg them to stay. "We know you're doing well," she said. "If you could just consult with us, even part-time, we could turn this around. Please, your brother is under a lot of pressure." That last line hit me harder than the rest. Your brother is under a lot of pressure. As if Ryan was the victim here. As if I hadn't been the one thrown out like garbage. I told her I'd think about it. When I hung up, I laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh that I didn't even recognize as my own. The audacity of it all. After everything they did, now they wanted me to swoop in and save them from themselves. And here's the kicker. The very next morning, I got an email from the VP. The competitor was greenlighting the acquisition plan. The only missing piece was my approval. In other words, I could save my parents' company, or I could let the machine I now led swallow it whole. After that phone call with my mom, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone glowing on the nightstand with unread emails piling up. On one side, the acquisition firm was waiting for my green light. On the other, my parents were suddenly treating me like the savior they'd never believed I could be. The irony was suffocating. For years, I had begged them to take me seriously, to recognize that I wasn't just the kid they could dump grunt work on. I had shown them charts, data, proposals, ways to modernize their systems, attract new clients, trim waste. Every single time, my ideas were dismissed. "We've been in this business longer than you've been alive," my dad would say. Or worse, "Let your brother handle the big picture, you stick to the details." That phrase, "you stick to the details," still stings. It was their way of telling me I'd never be more than background noise in my own family's story. But now, suddenly those details were the very things they desperately needed. Memories kept bubbling up, uninvited. Like the time I stayed up 3 nights in a row preparing a flawless pitch for a major client, only for Ryan to present it as his own. My parents praised him like he was some kind of prodigy while I sat in the corner, running on coffee and resentment. Or the time I skipped my best friend's wedding to cover for Ryan after he forgot about a deadline. When I asked my dad why Ryan wasn't being held accountable, he shrugged and said, "He'll grow into it. You're more reliable." Reliable. That was my role. The safety net. The invisible scaffolding holding everything up while Ryan got to play golden boy. So when my mom told me over the phone that Ryan was under pressure, I wanted to scream. Pressure? He had never known real pressure. He had always been insulated, coddled, protected from the consequences of his own laziness. Meanwhile, I had been chewed up and spat out by the very people who were now begging for my expertise. I kept telling myself this was just business, that I needed to strip the emotion away and think logically. From a purely strategic standpoint, acquiring their company made sense. It would give my division more reach, more resources, and more credibility. And honestly, it was a bargain. But emotions don't disappear just because you tell them to. Every time I tried to draft an email to the VP approving the takeover, I saw my parents' faces. Every time I considered picking up the phone to tell them no, I heard my mom's voice cracking as she said, "Please, we need your help." It felt like I was standing at a fork in the road with no good options. If I saved them, I'd be stepping back into the same toxic cycle I had escaped, letting them rewrite history as if they had never wronged me. If I let the acquisition go through, I'd be the executioner of the family business I had spent half my life building. And then there was Ryan. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but when he finally called, it was like every ugly piece of our past condensed into one conversation. "Hey man," he started casually, as if we were old buddies. "Look, Mom and Dad said they talked to you. I know things were rough before, but you're killing it now, right? So, why don't you help us out? It'll be good for the family. You wouldn't even have to do much. Just throw us a bone. Just throw us a bone." That was all I needed to hear. Ryan's words echoed in my head long after I hung up the phone. Just throw us a bone. Like the years I spent grinding away for free were nothing more than scraps. Like my sacrifices were background noise. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even gratitude. It was entitlement, pure and simple. He genuinely believed I owed him and our parents because family. For the first time in years, I decided to confront it head-on. I called my parents and told them we needed to meet face to face. We sat down in their office, the same office where they had fired me years ago. The walls looked older, the furniture more worn, and for the first time the place felt smaller. My dad looked tired, my mom looked worried, and Ryan strolled in late with a coffee in hand like he owned the world. "So," Ryan said, plopping down in a chair, "you gonna help us out or what?" No hello, no apology. Just expectation. I took a deep breath. "Do you even understand the position you're in right now? Your company is weeks away from collapse. Vendors are walking. Clients are gone. Employees are bailing. And you're sitting here acting like I owe you something?" My dad frowned. "Watch your tone. This is still our business." "Your business?" I snapped. It was my business too until you decided I was dead weight. Until you threw me out while keeping him. I pointed at Ryan. Because you couldn't admit he wasn't cut out for this. Ryan rolled his eyes. Here we go again. The victim act. Dude, you need to get over it. You were always better at the nerd stuff. I was better at people. That's why Dad wanted me in charge. I laughed bitterly. Better at people? Is that what you call losing every major client we had? Is that what you call employees quitting in droves? You didn't earn your seat, you were handed it. And you still managed to burn the house down. Silence hung in the room. My mom's eyes welled up. My dad's jaw clenched. Ryan just smirked like none of this mattered. Look, my mom said softly. We made mistakes. Maybe we should have treated you differently. But at the end of the day, we're family. Don't you think it's better to put the past aside and save what we built together? That line, save what we built together, cut deeper than I expected. Because the truth was, I had built so much of it. My ideas, my work, my sacrifices. And yet, in their eyes, it had always been theirs. I was never more than a tool to keep things running until Ryan was ready to take over. I looked at each of them in turn. My mom pleading, my dad simmering, Ryan smirking. And I realized there was nothing left for me in that room. No apology could undo years of being invisible. No amount of begging could erase the humiliation of being tossed aside. So I stood up. I don't owe you anything, I said quietly but firmly. Not anymore. My dad's face went red. You'd really let your own family drown just to prove a point? I met his glare. I'm not letting you drown. You handed me the knife years ago. I'm just choosing not to pull it out. Ryan scoffed, muttering something under his breath. But I didn't care. I walked out of that office with my head high for the first time in my life. The next morning, I emailed the VP. One line. Proceed with the acquisition. And just like that, the decision was made. Once I sent that email, proceed with the acquisition, there was no turning back. It was like flipping a switch. Lawyers were looped in, contracts drafted, assets assessed. The machine of corporate takeover moved faster than I expected. Within weeks, the deal was public. Announcements went out in industry newsletters. Emails hit the inboxes of vendors and clients, and the community started buzzing. My parents' company, the so-called untouchable pillar they had bragged about for decades, was officially being absorbed by their biggest competitor. And I, their discarded son, was leading the integration. The reactions were intense. Some people in town were shocked. I grew up hearing folks say my parents' company was too rooted to ever fall. But others, they weren't surprised at all. More than a few former employees reached out to me privately, sending congratulations. One even wrote, "About time karma came around. They should have valued you when they had the chance." Meanwhile, my parents were humiliated. My dad refused to answer my calls or emails, but I heard through mutual connections that he was telling people the acquisition was hostile, as if he hadn't dug his own grave with years of mismanagement. My mom, on the other hand, sent me a single text the day the deal was finalized. "I can't believe you'd do this to us. Do this to them." As if they hadn't fired me without hesitation. As if they hadn't left me scrambling to rebuild my life while Ryan coasted on his golden boy status. I wanted to scream at her. "I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself." But instead, I left her on read. And Ryan? Oh, Ryan had the audacity to call me. "Congrats, bro," he said, dripping with sarcasm. "Hope you're proud of yourself. You finally got what you wanted. You ruined us." I couldn't help laughing. "Ruined you? Ryan, you ruined yourselves. I just stopped trying to save you." He launched into a tirade about betrayal, loyalty, family. But all I heard was the same entitled whine I'd grown up with. He still didn't get it. In his mind, I was the villain for not cleaning up his mess. The community had mixed feelings. Some people praised me for stepping up and keeping jobs alive under new management. Others whispered that I had stabbed my family in the back. I couldn't control the narrative, but I knew the truth. I had finally stopped letting myself be treated like a disposable employee in my own family. The integration process was brutal. Sorting through years of sloppy records, outdated systems, and contracts that Ryan had let lapse felt like cleaning out a hoarder's house. My team worked around the clock to salvage what was usable and cut out what wasn't. And slowly, painfully, we started to rebuild. But every time I walked through those familiar halls, the same ones I used to roam as a kid, I felt a strange mix of triumph and grief. Triumph because I had proven myself. Grief because it shouldn't have come to this. It didn't have to end this way. I didn't destroy my parents' company. I transformed it. But to them, that distinction didn't matter. All they saw was that the empire they thought would be Ryan's legacy was now under my control. And to be honest, that stung. Because no matter how much they hurt me, a part of me had always hoped they'd wake up one day and say, "We were wrong. You were the one who kept this place alive." Instead, they painted me as the executioner. And maybe, in their eyes, that's exactly what I was. On paper, the acquisition was a success. We stabilized the finances, renegotiated contracts, and even rehired some employees who had quit under Ryan's disastrous management. The division was thriving, and my bosses were thrilled. They kept calling me the turnaround guy, like I had some magic touch. But behind the spreadsheets and boardroom smiles, my personal life was unraveling. My parents stopped speaking to me completely. My dad cut me off like I had never existed. He wouldn't answer calls, emails, or even acknowledge me when we ran into each other in town. The man who once boasted about my work ethic to anyone who would listen now acted like I was a stranger. My mom was more complicated. Some days she sent me long, emotional texts about how hurt she was. Other days she'd slip into guilt-tripping mode. "You've destroyed your father. He barely sleeps. This family will never be the same." And occasionally, she'd try to appeal to the son she thought she still had. "Can't we just talk about this? Put the business aside?" But the problem was, there was no putting the business aside. For my parents, the company had always been the family. When they fired me, they weren't just cutting costs, they were choosing Ryan over me. When I let the acquisition happen, I wasn't just making a business move. I was taking away their symbol of pride, their golden child's future. And Ryan, he turned into my loudest critic. He went around telling anyone who would listen that I sabotaged the company out of jealousy, that I had always been bitter and desperate for revenge. A few people bought into his narrative, especially those who only ever saw him as the charming face of the business. But the people who worked under him, they knew better. They'd lived through his incompetence. I won't lie, his words got to me sometimes. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I had gone too far. If maybe I should have tried one last time to save them, not for their sake, but for mine. Maybe then I wouldn't feel this gnawing guilt every time I drove past the old building with its new signage. My company's logo where my family's used to be. But then I'd remember the day they fired me. The way they looked at me like I was a liability. The way they never once offered an apology, even years later when their empire was crumbling. That memory kept me grounded. Still, there were cracks. Holidays became awkward minefields. Extended family whispered about me at gatherings. Some cousins pulled me aside and said, "You did what you had to do." Others avoided me completely. My reputation in the family shifted from the reliable one to the ruthless one. I started to realize something. I hadn't just inherited my parents' company. I had inherited their role, too. They had always put business above relationships, and now I was doing the same whether I admitted it or not. Was I proud of what I'd accomplished? Absolutely. But was there a part of me that mourned the family I lost in the process? Yes. Because the truth is, even when your parents treat you like you're disposable, some part of you still wants their approval. Some part of you still hopes they'll finally see you, finally acknowledge what you did for them. But all I got was silence. And the silence was louder than any boardroom applause could ever be. A year after the acquisition, the numbers spoke for themselves. My division was thriving. Profits were up, clients were returning, and industry magazines were running headlines about the remarkable turnaround. At conferences, people I had once admired were now approaching me for advice. On the outside, I looked like a success story. The kid who got fired by his own parents only to come back stronger and smarter, leading the company that swallowed theirs. Some people even called it a movie-worthy revenge arc. And I won't lie, there were moments when that narrative felt damn good. But behind the applause, things were messy. Ryan's spiral was the most obvious. With the business gone, he lost his identity. He had always leaned on the company like a crutch, using the title and family name as proof he was important. Without it, he was just another guy with an inflated ego and no track record. He tried starting his own consulting firm. Tanked within 6 months. He bounced from job to job, never lasting long. And every time he failed, he blamed me. According to him, I had stolen his legacy and poisoned the industry against him. In reality, his reputation was his own doing. People remembered him for missed deadlines, arrogance, and cutting corners. My involvement just shined a brighter spotlight on the mess he left behind. My parents didn't take it well either. My dad's pride curdled into bitterness. He refused to set foot in the building after the signage changed. My mom still sent the occasional text, always laced with guilt. We may not have done everything right, but family should forgive. When will you let go of the past? The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted me to let go of the past now that they were on the losing end. But when I had begged for fairness, begged for recognition, they had chosen Ryan every time. I told myself I didn't care, that I didn't need their approval. And for the most part, that was true. But every now and then, late at night when the office was quiet and my apartment felt too big, I wondered if I had truly won, or if I had just inherited their same brand of coldness. Because here's the thing, I did feel vindicated. I did feel proud of what I built. But I also carried the weight of knowing that my victory came at the cost of completely torching the bridge back to my family. I caught myself scrolling through old photos sometimes. Family barbecues, holidays, birthdays at the office. Back then, I still believed hard work would earn me a place at the table. I didn't know yet that the deck was stacked against me from the start. Maybe that's why the guilt lingers. Because even though they were wrong, so wrong, part of me still mourns what could have been if they had just chosen differently. If they had treated me like a son instead of a tool. The strangest part? In the industry, I was now known as the shark. Ruthless, calculated, a survivor. And maybe that's true. But I never set out to be ruthless. I just wanted to be valued. And when my parents refused to give me that, I found it somewhere else. But I can't help wondering, at what cost? If there's one thing I've learned, it's that business decisions don't stay in boardrooms. They spill into dining rooms, family reunions, and even social media feeds. At first, I thought the backlash would just be from my parents and Ryan. But slowly, the ripples spread further. It started with extended family. At Thanksgiving that year, my aunt cornered me in the kitchen. "I know your parents made mistakes," she whispered, glancing toward the dining room where Ryan was sulking. "But did you really have to take everything from them? Couldn't you have helped without, taking over?" I froze with the carving knife in my hand. How was I supposed to explain that I had offered help in the past, again and again, only to be dismissed? That my parents had never seen me as anything more than Ryan's shadow? All I said was, "I didn't take anything. They lost it. I just stepped in before it sank." She didn't look convinced. Then came the whispers from old friends. People I hadn't heard from in years sent DMs saying things like, "Savage move, man, but harsh. Couldn't you just let them fail on their own?" Others congratulated me but with a wink, like I had done something dirty and they admired the audacity. Even in the industry where people respected the turnaround, I picked up on undertones. Words like ruthless and cold-blooded followed me around like shadows. Some meant them as compliments. Others didn't. The strangest moment came when I ran into one of my old high school teachers at a coffee shop. She had known my parents for years and always admired their family business values. When she asked what I'd been up to and I explained the acquisition, she looked at me with genuine sadness. "I always thought you'd be the one to carry on their legacy," she said softly. And that hit me harder than I expected. Because in a way, I had carried on the legacy, I just had to burn the old version down first. All of this stirred something I'd been avoiding, doubt. For months, I'd told myself this was justice, karma, whatever you want to call it. That my parents were reaping what they sowed. But the more people questioned me, the more I found myself wondering, did I cross a line? I could have stepped in earlier, maybe saved them from the worst of it. I could have offered to consult without letting the acquisition firm pounce. But would that have changed anything? Or would it have just dragged me back into the same cycle of being undervalued and overlooked? I kept coming back to the same memory the day they fired me. The look on their faces when they said, "It's nothing personal." To them, I was just expendable. And maybe that's why I let it happen. Because for once, I wanted them to feel what I had felt. Powerless. Still, the question haunted me. Was I justified? Or had I become the villain in my own story? And that's why I'm here, typing this out for strangers on the internet. Because no matter how much success I've found, no matter how loudly I tell myself I did the right thing, the question keeps echoing in my head. AITA for letting my parents' company collapse when I could have saved it? It's been a few years since the acquisition was finalized, and the dust has mostly settled. My life has changed in ways I could have never imagined. Professionally, I'm thriving. My division has expanded, clients are loyal, and our reputation as a turnaround powerhouse is solid. I have influence, respect, and financial stability that I never dreamed of as the kid slaving away in my parents' office. But personal life? That's a different story. My parents never fully recovered from the acquisition, at least emotionally. My dad refused to see me for years, convinced I had betrayed the family. He's still proud of the business they built but bitter about losing it. My mom tried to reach out occasionally, but our conversations are strained, full of half apologies and unspoken accusations. I don't expect closure. I've learned that some relationships break in ways that can't be fixed, and this one is a prime example. Ryan, on the other hand, continues to struggle. His arrogance and laziness caught up with him, as I had predicted. His consulting firm failed spectacularly. He hops from job to job, trying to salvage a reputation that evaporated the moment he was left to his own devices. Occasionally, he calls or texts trying to guilt me or manipulate me, but I don't engage. I've learned that he will never see reality the way I do. To him, I'm still the villain, and that will never change. The business itself? Thriving. Employees are finally being treated fairly. Vendors are happy. Clients are returning. And, for the first time, I can walk through the old office spaces without seeing ghosts of past injustices, because the company now runs on merit, not favoritism. I won't lie, I feel a sense of satisfaction, almost vindication. For the first time in my life, I am respected for my skill, my vision, and my work ethic. The kid who was tossed aside is now the one in control. But that satisfaction is tempered with an unexpected side effect. Guilt. Even though I logically know I did nothing wrong, part of me still mourns the family that could have been. The celebrations, the holidays, the birthdays, all those moments stolen by favoritism, neglect, and poor choices. I didn't just win professionally. I also burned a bridge that can't be rebuilt. And so I sit here asking myself, and all of you, AITA? Am I selfish for putting my own life first and letting the company fall into the hands of someone who would run it better, even if it meant my family's pride would be shattered? Or am I justified for finally stepping into the role I was always meant to play, using the skills and knowledge they ignored for years? I don't know. I keep replaying the moments in my head. The firing, the favoritism, the sleepless nights trying to save a company that didn't value me. And I keep asking, was this revenge? Or was it just survival? To be honest, maybe it's a little of both. But one thing I do know, I am no longer the kid in the corner, invisible and expendable. I am the one who made the call, who took control, and who finally wrote my own ending. So Reddit, AITA,